That's recording. Okay. Oh. Huh. Thanks. Thanks. Perfect. Okay. Stop share. That one. Just wanted a place to type. The little capture stuff up here is broken. Bigger. Okay, so a couple, I think, pretty quick announcements. One, so no quiz on Wednesday. So break on that one. And you're supposed to be reading chapter 6 of the blue book, which is on anonymity. All right? Yes.
I was just going to ask, will we have a quiz on Friday?
No, we'll skip it for this week. So we'll have a regular quiz next Wednesday. Okay? Good question. Yeah.
And with the extra credit assignment, is that one's not due till the 18th? Is that right? Whenever it says on the D12?
Yeah, I gave you guys time because if you decided you want to do like the Bitcoin core, take a long time to download the blockchain.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll say if that's what your plan is, like don't wait. You need to like run a machine and let it like grind away for a while if you want to do that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And speaking of which, would you say it's probably a lot quicker and easier to do on the phone than the Bitcoin wallet?
Yes, I think that if I were, man, do I want to pick for you? There's a few quicker ways, but essentially you need something that's going to be sort of a third party to manage a blockchain for you. Either if you get the blockchain yourself, it's going to take a while, is what it comes down to. If you're willing to trust a third party to manage the blockchain transactions for you, everything gets a lot easier. But now you're trusting a third party, and you have to prove your identity to that third party. So if like a Coinbase account or something like that, it takes a couple of steps before they know that you are you, because they have to keep records of what transactions are happening with anybody. You can't just like sign up and make an account. So I think those might be some trade-offs.
When you're doing that stuff, is there any like severe personal information?
Yeah, I'd call that severe. Like they need to know who you are from the point of view of reporting to the IRS. Like it's just the same as signing up for a bank account, because it is a bank account. Like they're doing the same kinds of transactions, and so yeah, they want a photo ID and your social security number, all that stuff, when you're creating those things. Is that good? So you could do it if you want. The anonymous version would be sort of like a paper wallet kind of idea, right? And that's great, but now you have to figure out how to get any money in there, right? Because if you don't have an exchange, then how do you get Bitcoin in there, right? You have to like sell a mountain bike or something like that to someone for Bitcoin, right? You have to figure out what trade and find someone that wants to trade for you. Not to say it's impossible, but you got to figure out how somewhere. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so I wanted to talk about the anonymity sort of thing, and just in the first section, I tried to bring it up in a more open sort of way. So, like, take Bitcoin out of your mind, with one maybe important exception. Just understand that the ledger is public, right? Anybody can get all the transactions, and so the address stuff, right? The public addresses are just recorded in the ledger. They're just in there, right? So okay, so that's just a fact. And I mean, we talked a lot about different parts of the protocol now, but it's a public ledger. But the addresses don't have your name on them, right? I mean, they could, I suppose, somebody could add a note somewhere and say, you know, this one's mine. But so far, like, there's nothing in the protocol that forces you to do that at all. Right? You can create lots of addresses and have lots of transactions. You just go to different addresses. It's just a matter of how many of them do you control, right? So, just as an analogy, think about Reddit or something like that, where you can create an account that has a handle name, right? It's not necessarily your name, and then you can post to a forum like that. But it's public forum, right? So everybody can read it, right? And they're all like tagged, like this person or this handle said this thing. So thinking of a forum sort of a space like that, or something similar, just as an analogy, like what could you do if you saw that there was somebody in there that you really wanted to figure out who they were? Like, what could you do? So I guess that as a motivating example, like imagine that person is, I don't know, somehow really bad, right? Like he's a pedophile and he's lurking right in your forums, and he's coming in and they're posting by a pseudonym. How would you figure out who that person is? Or know more about them. I guess not necessarily like, oh, I know for sure it's this person. Like, how would you maybe, what would be some things to try to narrow down who that person is?
Well, I don't know if it would narrow it down, just like seeing what kind of transaction they're doing.
Okay, like, so give me an example if you would.
I don't know if it's different in Bitcoin, but like, let's say you go to like a Walmart store, you notice there's a customer who spends more of their time in a specific location than they do everywhere else. So like you'll have a couple customers who go down to like the clothing section of Walmart, who might have some others that go down to produce
Okay.
more.
So, so I would call that what's called a sort of a side channel attack, the sort of monitoring behavior. So let's see here. So trying to carry it over to Bitcoin protocol. So maybe you just always notice that the certain transactions happen at certain times, for example, right? And maybe so the location version of that actually is interesting, right? Before the blockchain, there's the mempool, right? And so if you can watch how transactions enter the mempool, you get a location idea, like what IP addresses are they broadcasting from to start broadcasting into the mempool. So that'd be really, I think, a close analogy to that idea of sort of where, right? Just like with Reddit, if you're at the subpoena level, like for really a criminal activity, you could subpoena Reddit, like tell me what IP addresses have been used to make those posts, right? So the protocol doesn't hide those entry points. And so you could use that, use maybe timing attacks, right? Like just timing, like when are they doing things from? So I guess there's this idea of side channel. So the idea of a side channel is it's like not really the protocol itself, but kind of around it. If you were to think of different ways that people could reveal information that they didn't quite intend. And a really important side channel idea is, even though the addresses are anonymous, the amounts aren't, right? They're very public, right? The amounts that are going through the network or what's being recorded on the blockchain. So if you have consistent, like if you're getting monthly payments for something, right? Well, right, here's a certain amount that keeps on showing up, maybe to different addresses every time, but it's the same amount, right? Then, well, apparently that's the same person, right? Especially with some sort of oddball number, right? So here's this odd number, once a month, it goes to this new address. So, well, I think those are all the same, right? So yeah, an important part of the public record is the actual total. And so by tracking where the money goes, right, just by looking at the total amounts, which would be reduced, by mining fees and that sort of stuff, right? Like, okay, there's money to disappear. But, almost all the money ends up from here to there. Well, on a consistent basis, that's pretty strong evidence that those two addresses are just linked. If you're trying to launder money by shifting around addresses. So side channel attacks, I guess that's the idea of creating links. So linking is the idea of trying to figure out that there are two addresses, right, that really are associated with the same controller, the same person just controls these addresses. an interesting thing that was brought up in the book about figuring out what addresses are controlled by kind of entities, a good way to do that is actually interact with them. So if you are trying to figure out like what's the address kind of world of some organization, well, join the organization and send them some money, right? Or send them some Bitcoin. And then since it's public ledger, you can watch exactly how it flows, right? At that point, like, okay, I guess these are the addresses that they control in that way. So linking addresses is a way to figure out like what are the sort of the bigger organizations and maybe how do they, what sort of address group do they share? And then, other addresses end up going there, makes that associate, okay, apparently they have that same account, they're working with the same company or something like that. Let's see here. I wanted to bring up the idea of the fake coin. It was mentioned in the AOC book, chapter 2. So fake coins, just talking about anonymity. So do you guys remember talking about the fake coins? Sort of, it's fun. It's a weird thing. So a while ago, there's this island nation. Sorry, I don't remember the details of the name. Their money were these giant stone donuts. And they were really big, like 12 feet high. And so they represented value. And I guess, they're hard to make and all that. So it makes sense that, okay, that's worth something somehow. But there's just such a pain in the neck to actually move around, right? Can't like give you change because they're like 3,000 pounds or something, right? And you got to drag them around. There's just no way, right? So they started with the fake coins. They established their sense of a money off of these fake coins. But then since they were so hard to move around, they got to the point of a public ledger or a ledger for like who owned how much of which one, right? So little fractions of fake coins going around. So they kind of virtualized it right away. It's like, okay, well, really, rather than moving the coin, we'll just say you own it and put it down a ledger, right? And then they ran into the problem that the person that was keeping track of the ledger was too easy to bribe, right? It would be muscled by like the chief, the village chief, about what was in there. And so it was switched to the way you spent your money is every little household had their own ledger. And then if you wanted to spend money, you went into the little town center and just shouted what transaction was going to happen. And then everybody just wrote it down in a ledger, their ledger, right? And then it was agreed upon that if more than half of the people of the ledgers agreed that transaction happened, then it happened. So it's really analogous to the way Bitcoin works. So I bring it up now, first because it's fun, but second because it's interesting that in that kind of economy, I think it'd be really hard to create kind of graft and corruption, bribes, all that sort of stuff would be super hard to do, right? Because you have to shout out all the transactions in public, right? So how would you decide you're going to bribe somebody if that's the way money worked, right? To do a transaction. So I guess back in that society, they had built a society that was very open from the sense of knowing exactly how much everybody had, right? Because I'm not sure how else you do it, right? Somebody just come out and just shout, like, oh, I'm spending whatever, 300 Fey or whatever units they had, and to this person, right? And everybody wrote it down in transactions. So the world that we live in, we are not happy with that idea, that we like a certain amount of privacy about our transactions. People tend to not want everybody to know what their salary is. And from a business perspective, the idea of having everybody know all the details of the transactions that you're running is a dangerous thing for a lot of companies, right? Because you're basically revealing a bunch of information about what you're about to release, like when it's going to happen, whether you're like in financial trouble or not, all those things that maybe if you if we're public, could really harm your ability to maybe exist or the your plans. So I guess in easy examples like the Apple iPhone sort of rollout there was leave secret, right? But if all those transactions were public, then by watching supply chain into the company, you know, right, when they're ready to roll out something new, and basically what it was built from, right? Just by watching, like, okay, who they being paid. So I'll just say that the society you live in right now will be very uncomfortable moving to a totally public system where everybody just knew everybody's business. And so there, and I think there were some really important places. So the AOC book started with like trying to pay women in Afghanistan, I think it was, or Pakistan, somewhere like that, as a motivation for why Bitcoin showed up in that economy, because if there were public records, they'd be risking their lives to participate in the economy, right? And so having anonymity really like allows them to participate, right? They need it to have that work. So okay, so anonymity can be a good thing. The textbook talks about different sort of ideas and some ways in which you can create it. Okay, so and then a couple last points. So the last section is called Zero Cash. You can skip it. It's actually not popular. There is a modern cryptocurrency called Monero. So Monero is, I'd say, probably the best working example of all the anonymity protocols are rolled into one cryptocurrency. It's really Monero. So you can do things to create hidden addresses and do sort of a money laundering step where you're swapping between transactions enough so you really can't trace where the money goes. So basically, if you cohort, right, if you have a group of people that randomly associate and they combine all their transactions and then they spread them out randomly, right? You sort of lose track of who belongs to what. You do that a couple times and you get to anonymity. So there's some things in Bitcoin that allows part of it. There's a thing called dark wallets, which is pretty interesting. But I'd say if you needed anonymity, I think there's a better choice. It'd be use Monero instead to sort of maintain that sort of structure. Oh, and then so one last important thing. You can, so I said skip Zero Cash. You don't have to read about it because it's kind of not a thing right now. Oh, and maybe one thing I didn't mention in the first group, Tor. Anybody heard of Tor? Okay, so last bit, and we're out of time. So the Tor network is anonymizing. It's not part of Bitcoin. Tor anonymizes the internet. So if you want to try to hide where you're dropping things into the mempool, use the Tor network, and then you can't really identify where did it start from. So Tor network is a way to anonymize the internet for kind of any protocol, including Bitcoin. So and again, the Moneros and things like that have better integration with things like Tor network. Okay, is that good for today? Okay, great. You guys have a good day. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Oh, it's this one. And that one. Share. And